Just need to get everything rolling. Hopefully things look good and sound good. We're going to be talking about the GH6, Lumix GH6, the next pocket cinema camera from Blackmagic, whatever that might be, and then the S1H and what needs to happen to that camera. Also a Lumix camera. I figured I'd talk about this stuff on this stream just because this is so prevalent in my mind, considering the recent announcements from Canon and Sony and Blackmagic as well with the 12K camera, and how that correlates to kind of how I shoot, because I don't really use Canon for much other than photography. Don't shoot with Sony. I do use Blackmagic, the Ursa Mini Pro, but aside from that, I'm pretty much GH5, and would love to get my hands on an S1H, but just hasn't resonated with me enough to make the purchase of that camera. $4,000 is a little bit expensive, but that's why we're going to talk about maybe a price drop or something there. I'm going to break this up into shorter videos that I can publish later, but if you tune in for the live stream, welcome. Glad you're here. We can chat, interact, that whole thing. But other than that, I'm just going to make some videos that are then going to be published later, in which case, it doesn't matter if you're here or not. Sit back, relax, listen, whatever. Doesn't really matter. Let's start with the GH6. That's a good place to start. I am a GH5 shooter. I've shot with the GH4. One of my first mirrorless cameras ever was a GH1. I'm very familiar with the GH series, and I'm eagerly anticipating a GH6. Now that we have a Sony a7S Mark III out, or at least announced at this point, we've got the Canon R5. I think the inevitable conclusion that everyone comes to is like, well, what's Panasonic going to do with the next Lumix GH, probably GH6? I have some of my own personal thoughts. We can at least start with an article that I found on Tech Radar. This was written back in June, so it's not, super recent, but this is about the newest article I could find regarding the GH6 and what may be coming. There's not a lot rumored about this camera. I think the pandemic has kind of put things into a little, obviously delayed a lot of things, changed roadmaps and whatnot, and when things get announced and what events are happening. So I don't know that any company necessarily even knows what they're going to do. So it may be futile for me from the outside to even guess or estimate what they're going to do, because they probably don't even know. But we can at least read through some of this article, because I thought it was kind of interesting, a few things they bring up. The first and foremost is that there may be 3 versions of the GH6. So the GH5 came out 3 years ago, and then they followed up with the GH5S for kind of a lower light version of the GH5, which a lot of people have and a lot of people like. It was more expensive, had some trade-offs, but there were 2 versions of the GH5. I personally have only shot with the GH5, the original, not the S version. It didn't seem worth it to me. Now they're talking about maybe there's going to be 3 versions of the GH6, which I actually think they probably shouldn't do. It kind of frustrates me when there's different SKUs of the same camera and the same model. It's like, I get that it's meant to cater to different audiences, but I think you end up confusing a lot of the marketplace when you do that. When you're talking about, oh, there's going to be a GH6, but then there's a GH6V, and then there's also a GH6X, if these are in fact even the names, which they probably aren't. This is probably just a rumor. But if we were to take this at face value and say, okay, is this a good idea for them to implement on their cameras? I would say no. I think having a GH5 as like, this is our flagship GH5, and then they have the G9 and they have the G85 and they have all these GX cameras. There's plenty of SKUs out there. Why does there need to be a slight alteration of the main one? I have the same criticism with the Lumix S1, the full frame camera from Lumix. There's the S1, the S1R, and the S1H, and as a consumer having to figure out and determine, well, which one's right for me. It's nice that the options are there, but the fact that they're so closely aligned, but yet so radically different in important, meaningful ways of like, why is one significantly more expensive? It can be frustrating to have to kind of work through all that. And I think it ends up confusing the messaging. I would say Canon's probably a little bit better about this. They have the Canon R5 and then the R6. Similar cameras, but they have at least a different number, or there's a different enough. It's not like the R5X and the R5V and the R5 A, B, C, and D. At some point, when you add too many, it just becomes ridiculous. And I think even with a few, it can become overwhelming for a lot of people. And they just kind of, well, which one's the good one is ultimately what everyone kind of wants to know. Like, which one should I buy? And in that case, like, maybe you should have just made that one and kind of put all your eggs in that basket. But, you know, it's not my company. I'm not the one that gets to say. This article goes on to mention that, you know, autofocus should be better. That's obvious. The GH6 desperately needs better autofocus, compared to, not necessarily compared to like that the GH5 autofocus is bad, but just that the other options out on the market from Canon and Sony are much, much better. So improving autofocus is an absolute must. Will it be enough? We'll see. And yeah, that's kind of, I'll let you read the rest of the article if you'd like, but it's kind of basic. In terms of what's rumored and speculated. So I thought I'd share some of what I think is going to happen, just hypothetically. Let's just have fun. Let's just talk about what a GH6 would look like. And then maybe a little bit of like a wish list from my perspective, what I hope they do. And I've made videos like this in the past about the GH5 before that was out, and they didn't do anything that I wanted. So it's just an exercise for fun. It's not like I actually think these things will come true, but if they do, hey, that'll be awesome. Maybe someone is listening. I think the GH6 will have 6K. It makes sense. The GH4 had 4K. The GH5, not 5K, but like, okay, that's an in-betweener. GH6, let's do 6K. And do they need to go to 8K? I mean, it's been speculated that the sensor may be capable of it. So if it's there, then great. But I think 6K is definitely adequate for most people. And it just kind of makes sense with the name of the camera, the GH6, and it shoots 6K, like a really good, nice, high quality 6K. Like it's a 6K camera. I think that makes sense for the price point, for the sensor size, for everything about the GH cameras. Getting to 6K makes sense at this point in time compared to Canon doing 8K, compared to Sony doing 4K but higher frame rates. And that's something that should be on the GH6 as well, more frame rates. And this is kind of the obvious evolution of any camera. The resolution should probably increase reasonably. I don't think doing 8K and then having a camera that overheats is a good idea, but I've made another video kind of criticizing Canon for that. The GH6 can do 6K. It's a reasonable upgrade. Focus on the video features. I think that's what makes the GH camera so special, is their kind of commitment to video and how early they embraced true proper video features in a hybrid mirrorless camera. I talk about this all the time, but shutter angle, the fact that you can set shutter angle on a GH5 and the GH4 before it, and I don't remember when they first implemented that, but just that you can do it and makes shooting video, it's a firmware feature, right? It's just in the software. It's just a little switch or a little thing they can program. It doesn't require anything special hardware-wise on the camera. It's just a way to set the shutter, but being able to dial in shutter angle rather than just shutter speed, which is a photography thing. Let's do shutter angle, which is a more video film thing. Let's use that, and that should be widely embraced on all these cameras at this point in time because they're pushing video, and the GH cameras have been doing that a lot longer, intentionally putting that out there. The Lumix brand is, hey, we are champions of video in a hybrid form. Takes good photos, shoots great video. You want to do both, and that's why it's so popular for so many people. The sensor size, let's talk about that. I think it would be wise for them to consider adding a slightly bigger than micro four thirds sensor. I know this is crazy to anyone who's a micro four thirds fanatic. You can keep the mount the same, keep it micro four thirds, but do a super 35 sensor in the GH6. This is actually, if you don't know the camera, there's the JVC LS300. It has exactly that. It's a micro four third mount with a super 35 millimeter sensor. It's it's like the only camera I can think of that's done this, and I understand why it's not popular because I don't think a lot of people understand the benefits of it. Keep the GH6 micro four third mount. So if you put a micro four third lens on there, it crops the sensor. Like you'll get, that micro four third look with your micro four third glass, and nothing changes. This is just like if you put an APS-C lens on a full frame camera from Canon or Sony, they know to crop because of the lens, and you can change that and you can say like, don't crop it, I don't want it to crop, but like it's intelligent enough to know that the lens is meant for a smaller sensor, so it crops the image, and that's how it's meant to work. And I think people love this feature on full frame cameras. it would be great to have in a micro four third body, because then imagine being able to put full frame or Super 35 APS-C lenses on your GH6 and having with an adapter, right? Because so many people are adapting glass to micro four third. Half of my bag is adapters from Canon to Nikon. There's so many different ways to put different lenses on micro four third mount, just because you can basically put anything on there that you want. Makes it kind of universal for all this glass that's out there, old vintage stuff, newer stuff that's meant for DSLR cameras with like a mirror box. I mean, now that Canon is moving away from EF and they're going to RF, you're gonna have a lot of EF lenses out there that are great lenses, are fantastic, and they can be used on the RF system. But I imagine they're gonna be a little bit cheaper, a little bit come down in value where people are moving to the RF system. All that glass is still valuable. Imagine being able to put that on a GH6 with an adapter, and you have a Super 35 sensor in there. You could use a speed booster on the micro four third mount, but it's a Super 35 sensor, and now you can actually get a full frame equivalent with a speed booster working that trick, which also works on the JVC LS300. If you don't know about that camera, look it up, because it's really interesting, kind of quirky what they did, but I think it'd be smart to do something similar as kind of like a neat benefit for the people who understand. The people that don't, or they don't really get the reasoning of why you would want to do that, it's still, the GH6 should still do all the same things, like resolution for photography and everything would be the same for micro four third, but it has this kind of cool, maybe it's like more of like a hidden feature or a nice little benefit. If you think back to the GH2, it had a multi-aspect sensor. So basically it was a larger micro four third sensor, and at no point in time were you actually seeing the full sensor. It would just crop differently depending on what you were shooting. But because it was multi-aspect, it was a little bit oversized, you were able to do things like have kind of this wider field of view on a micro four third camera, and you're not degrading when you're cropping from 16:9, 4:3, 3:2, or all the different variations there, different aspect ratios. You're not hurt as much compared to if you have like a 4:3 sensor and then you shoot 4:3, and great, you get everything there, but when you move to 3:2 or 16:9, now you're cropping in on that. So having a slightly large sensor gives you a lot of benefits in a lot of ways that aren't immediately obvious. It doesn't, strike you at the front of the page of like, oh, this is why you need this feature, but it would be really smart and really helpful for people like myself, and I imagine a lot of other shooters out there who like micro four third, because it was one of the first mirrorless systems that made sense and had, invested in video with the GH cameras. I've got a lot of micro four third lenses, but I also have a lot of other lenses, cinema lenses, old school photography lenses for TSLRs that I love to mix and match depending on the project, and just having that functionality is great. Of course, the GH6, they have to keep anamorphic, and even more anamorphic features are great. I love that the GH cameras have embraced this as well. It's a very video film-centric thing to be able to shoot anamorphic. Keep doing it. Don't stop. Like, nothing should be taken away, because everything about the GH5 is awesome. Just make it better. Another thing I've talked about before that I think would be valuable on a GH6 is some kind of internal ND mechanism. Now, is this a filter wheel where you like scroll and you have filters that slot in place? If there's room, great, do that. If there's not room, or there's a better way to do it with like an electronic ND that has kind of been in, I believe it's like the FS5 or one of it's the Sony FS5 or a version thereof. There's an electronic ND. And the reason this is so important, a lot of people may not understand the benefit of like, well, why I can just use an external ND filter. It's really, really valuable to not have to put a filter on a lens, and then when you want to change lenses, having to change the filter with it. Lenses come in all shapes and sizes, and those filters don't always work. If you have a cinema lens, well, now you have to go to a matte box system, and your filters may not match up, or you have to have multiple filters to do the same thing. It's so much easier when it's built right into the camera, like it is on broadcast cameras. And again, this is a very video-centric feature that a lot of people who shoot video need, because you're outdoors and your shutter speed is kind of locked. So to explain why this is so valuable, okay, when you're shooting video, your shutter angle 180 degrees, like pretty much all the time. It's not always, but for the most part, 180 degree shutter angle. You're probably going to be shooting f2.8, f4 if you're on a micro four third sensor, because you want that shallow depth of field. Probably you want the blurry background. So your aperture is going to be, you're going to be using a fast aperture because you want that shallow depth of field. And your ISO, yes, it can go up, when you have low light situations and you need to amplify the light, you need to make those photo sites and those pixels more sensitive so you can amplify the light that you're collecting. But there really isn't a good internal mechanism for when you have too much light, given the fact that your shutter angle is kind of set and your aperture is kind of set. You probably want to be shooting with the lowest ISO possible, or at least native, so that you have low noise in your image. But how do you go below that? There isn't a good mechanism in cameras, in these mirrorless cameras, and that's why you need ND filters. It's annoying to have to put them on the front of a lens and then switch them when you're changing lenses. Build it into the camera. This would be kind of radical in the mirrorless, small, hybrid, compact market. This is a very big camera feature, and if there's room for it, if they can figure out a way to cram it into a GH6, I think it would be one of the most valuable features they could add. It would probably sell the camera alone, on that alone, just for the video people who want that functionality and that ease of use, that I can go anywhere and shoot anything because I can control my aperture, which I'm mostly locked in. I can control my shutter, which I'm mostly locked in. I want a low ISO because I want low noise. So really I can use the ND to actually control my exposure, and I'm not risking using, cheap third-party ND filters or losing a filter or getting scratched or switching lenses and it being this huge hassle. And it's not really just even a video feature either. Think of all the times you're doing photography and it's daylight. Well, I guess it depends on the type of photographer you are, but like there are many situations where you want a slower shutter speed when you're doing photography to get more motion blur. Think, landscape, waterfalls during the daytime. How do you get those beautiful water streaks from, with all that motion blur? It's using ND filters while you're taking a photo. This isn't super common. A lot of people may not think of photography in this way, but ND filters are just as valuable for certain types of imaging when you're taking photos. And so while at the forefront it looks like a video feature, it has this great photography benefit as well, truly making that hybrid camera make sense. This would be huge, and I think they should absolutely try and do something like this on a GH6. And then when you look at that and you say, okay, it's 6K, it's got good frame rates, internal stabilization, keep that, keep the flip screen, like keep most of what the GH5 is, and then add these few other really helpful features that no one else is really doing. At least the functionality, like the Super 35 sensor, like that's weird and kind of quirky, but it makes sense. Same thing with the built-in NDs. People say, oh, you don't really need that. But like once you have it, you don't want to lose it. Keep things like shutter angle, keep things like anamorphic, like everything about the camera. Just when you put that all together in one package and you say, well, yeah, it's not 8K, but it doesn't overheat. And yeah, it's not full frame like the Sony, but it has built-in NDs. And you look at it and you go, okay, well, these other cameras are around kind of like $3,000, $4,000 for the full frame one. Now you're looking at a $2,000, maybe sub $2,000 camera with the GH6. That's incredibly attractive, and I think they would sell a lot of cameras by doing just that. If there's other features that I'm not even thinking about, of course, like add those too, right? I can only have so many ideas, but from my personal experience, GH5 is great. These are the few extra features that would really put it over the top and get it to, be a clear winner in the marketplace. And I think you wouldn't have as much of the, when you talk about Lumix cameras to people who shoot Sony, and if it's the Micro Four Thirds ones, because now Lumix has full frame, so you have to make that distinction with the S1, the S1H and the S1R and the S1 are full frame Lumix cameras. But in general, Lumix has been known, Micro Four Third brand, primarily with the GH cameras at least, for quite some time, as being a smaller sensor, having to deal with a crop factor. And you get into the whole conversation of lenses and focal lengths and, well, what's the crop? What's the crop? It's not full frame. What's the crop? If you shoot Micro Four Third, you can work around all these things, and it's not actually that big of a deal. But people who come from that full frame mindset just think, oh, well, like it's not full frame, so it must be bad. I'll pay more for this other one. But then the people who get a GH5 or a GH4 or maybe a GH6 in the future understand like how powerful these cameras are and the amount that you can do. And even though it's not full frame, you still get all of these benefits, and you can basically, you can do anything that a Sony camera can do as well, aside from the autofocus. That's the one thing. The autofocus, not as good, but I mean, once they fix that technology, like that'll be there too. So I don't want to say it's the perfect camera, right? If you need autofocus, maybe the GH6, they can do it. Maybe they can implement some new tracking so you can actually get like razor sharp images just focused on eye tracking. Like that would be the best, right? Hopefully they can do it. But you know, if that's a feature that's like kind of a deal breaker, do you need that absolute like autofocus tracking in any situation? Then go for a Sony. You probably, if you know that's what you want, then obviously get the Sony. But if you want to be more video focused, which a lot of times I'm not shooting autofocus anyway, I'm doing manual focus, so in that case it doesn't really help me. These features would be my personal, that's what I would want in my bag. That's what I would want to pull out. That's the camera I would love to shoot with each and every day. And given the price point of it, it should be cheaper. It's micro four third. It should be cheaper than a full frame camera. So like that to me is the perfect package of what, and if and when the GH6 comes, I think they'd sell a lot of cameras doing something like that. And I really think, I'm surprised there's not more rumors about the GH6. I really think there should be more people talking about it, but who knows? If the S1H drops in price, I'm reading the chat right now. I'm buying 3 more. Yeah, I love this camera. I cannot wait. We're going to get to it. The S1H. I think Panasonic should focus more on improving high frame rates and unify the color science in the GH and GH5S. Yeah, absolutely. I think the GH6, they should, I probably should have said this. The GH6 needs to have some kind of reversioning of Vlog, Vlog L, and even Vlog. Like Canon and Sony have had S-Log, S-Log 2, S-Log 3, you have C-Log, C-Log 2, C-Log 3. Like they're constantly changing their log profile. Or log, I don't know if it's technically a profile, but that log, right? Like, what does log look like in the camera? GH6 needs to have a Vlog 2 or something like that, an update, because it's desperately needed at this point. They can do without higher resolution. I agree. 4K is probably good enough for most people, but if you're finalizing in 4K, it is always better to have a little bit more resolution on the input side than the final output, just because of the way workflow and codecs and processing just works. It's just always better to start with a little bit more. Now, do you need 8K or 12K to finalize in 4K? No, not necessarily, but I think that extra, if that 6K realm, 6K scaled down to 4K as your final mastering output would be beautiful. When they announced the 8K, I didn't even flinch. Sony's 4K at 120 though, now that's a feature that caught my attention. 4K 120, yes, absolutely. 4K 60 looks great, and that's what the GH5 does, right? And that's, 3 years old. So I would imagine the GH6 should be able to do more than 4K 60. 4K 120, that would basically put everyone in the market at the same point. Canon does it, Sony does it, Panasonic does it. It makes sense. It'll probably happen. And then having, 6K 60 or something like that would be a nice little icing on the cake. There's room for improvements in the in-body image stabilization too. Yes, stabilization can always be improved. Those are like the incremental things that I think once a feature is in a camera, it should always get better. Resolution should improve. ISO, low light capabilities should improve. Stabilization should improve. Autofocus should improve. You would never want to take a step back or lose any one of these features. So that's why I kind of think about, okay, like what are like the cool new things that they could add that would be meaningfully different enough than the person who just says, well, I already have a 4K camera. I don't need 6K, so I'm going to pass on this one, right? It's that like feature creep that you see all the time on cell phones and smartphones, right? The iPhone, whatever they're on now, the 11, I have the X, but what's the 12 going to have? What's the 13 going to have? What's the 14 going to have? And just saying things, well, it's faster. It's got better battery life. It's like these things are expected. What are you doing new and different that actually changes the way that I interact with the phone that makes me want to get something new and something different? I think that started with the multiple cameras and being able to kind of fake the shallow depth of field on your phone by kind of putting the two images together, or at least sensing the depth and creating, the portrait mode on the iPhone. But now it's just become comical. You know, you have you have cell phones out there that have like 4 lenses on them, and you're like, is this necessary? It's like, it reminds me of the razors, you know, where it was like, oh, 2 blades. Oh, now this is 3 blades. Oh, now it's the Schick Quattro, and this is 5 blades. And this is like, how many blades do you need on a razor? And at what point is it actually hurting you rather than helping you? I think it's kind of the same way with like cameras. Like, I would rather have like 1 or 2 really good sensors and lenses on the cell phone than like 6 different lenses for 6 different scenarios that you might find yourself in. It's like, at that point, like, you can buy the external lenses, you can clip them on, or you might as well get into, what is it, the Litro camera that's like light field that has like 16 lenses on it. Like, serves a very specific purpose, but it's kind of comical to see that they just keep adding lenses to these smartphones. So that's the kind of stuff I like to look at with cameras like the GH6. What could they meaningfully add that's different or unique, that's not already there, that would be a selling point for me personally, that I think other people would probably benefit from too, even if they don't realize it right away and they say, well, I don't use ND filters. It's like, well, why don't you? If you don't see the value in an ND filter, then like, you're not shooting in the best proper way, if that makes sense. You're not using all of the tools at your disposal to make the best looking image. I think the issue, though, is they have to maintain the ability to do so 4:3 for anamorphic. So what resolution could they go to? Yeah, so that's the S1H. You know, the maximum resolution on the S1H is 6K, and that's 3:2. We're actually going to talk about that in a little bit. So yeah, I mean, aspect ratios play a role in all of this, but 6K, 16:9, your standard, you know, widescreen, high resolution format for video that we're all familiar with. I don't think 16:9 is going away anytime soon. Obviously, we have social media platforms that have 9:16. That's a little bit different, but I think we're sticking with 16:9. Back in the chat, knew the ability to zoom and refocus during shooting. Do you mean like tapping the screen? Because that is annoying that on the GH5 you can't like punch in to do focus while you're recording. So yes, functionally, like in the software, it should allow you to do that 100%. Another one from the chat. This is exactly the right time for Panasonic to come with a killer GH6 when all can see that the new Sony and Canon offerings have overheating problems. I have never had an overheating issue with the GH5, and I live in Phoenix, so trust me, it's hot here. I mean, granted, I'm not putting my camera in the sun intentionally. I'm not trying to get it to overheat. Maybe that's a good test to do one day. Like, how hot? That's a great idea for a video. Thank you for leaving this in the chat. I'm gonna go put the GH5 outside in 120 degrees tomorrow. I'll record it. I'll make a video, and we'll see at what point the camera overheats and it stops shooting. It'll be interesting to test compared to like what people are testing now with the Sony and the Canon, and they're just like overheating in their room where it's like 70 degrees. I don't know. Yeah, I put the GH5, push it to the limit. And Atomos, is it the Atomos Ninja 5 or Ninja V? I think it's the Ninja V, because I don't remember a Ninja 1, 2, 3, and 4, but maybe they existed. I don't know. Let me know. Plus a speed booster, plus a Sigma 18-35. Yes, make Lumix Micro Four Third camera even better. My G9 and GH5 have extra powers with them. Sigma 18-35, if you don't shoot full frame, you're shooting APS-C, Super 35, if you're shooting on the Ursa Mini, or you're shooting with the GH5, or any not full frame, but like small, like the Sigma 18-35, it doesn't get enough praise, and it gets praise every day on the internet. People love that lens. I love that lens. It's on my camera, actually right now in the background. Probably can't see it, but there's a GH5 back there with the 18-35 on it, with the speed booster, because that's just like, it's one of my favorite ways to shoot. As kind of like an all-in-one, just beautiful little setup. Dual ISO, yes, that's another feature from the S1H that would be cool to see on the GH6. Dual ISO, better low light, like the GH5S, yes, but with even better IBIS, in-body image stabilization. I don't like saying IBIS. I don't know, it just bothers me. IBIS. I can read it. It's one of those things when you read it, it's normal and you just glance right over it, but when you have to say it, IBIS. Like, that's why I refuse for the Canon cameras. EOS. It's really annoying. It's on all of their cameras, and because it's technically the Canon EOS R5, the Canon EOS R6, the Canon EOS 5D Mark. It's been EOS forever. I don't know why it's necessary. I don't know what distinction EOS has, but it's on all these cameras, and it drives me nuts that it's a word that has to be said. I don't know why. It just irritates me a little bit. 4K 120, turn the HDMI output on in 6K anamorphic. Yes, agree with all of that. Ninja 5. Oh, so there was a 1, 2, 3, and 4. I have the Shogun, what is it? The Shogun Inferno. But like there's been multiple versions of that. And I think Atomos has that same problem that I was, talking about at the beginning with the GH5 and the 5S, and now if it's the GH6 and then the GH6V, or now there's the Sony A7S. Like Sony is right on that line where like you can't, just even reading the names where you have A7 III and then A7S III or A7 IV, A7S II, like knowing the differences between these random letters and numbers, even for someone who pays really close attention to all this stuff, even just reading it, it's easy to get confused as to like what's what and what they're talking about. And at the end of the day, people always want to know what is the good one, which one should I buy? And when they have so many, you're like, I don't know. Well, this one's got high resolution, but this one has like really low resolution, but it's for video. Okay, is there some kind of middle ground we can reach here where like it's best of both worlds? No, apparently not. They have to make all these different SKUs. And then people end up, I mean, it's nice if you really want to get just the camera that does the one thing. I want the Swiss Army knife, right? Like there's butter knives that are meant for spreading butter on toast, and there's steak knives that are meant for cutting steak. I want the Swiss Army knife because I don't know when I'm going to need a corkscrew or a pair of scissors, or I need to clip a fingernail or something, whatever's in a Swiss Army knife. Like I want the multi-tool that does it all. And maybe it's not the best, steak knife, but it can still cut a steak and it can still butter your toast and it can do all these other things in between. For the amount of situations you find yourself in as a video shooter, you can have a custom specific tool in your toolkit for every scenario. You can do this at Home Depot too with power tools, right? There's power tools that are meant for very specific tasks, but then there's other ones that are kind of like it saws things, it cuts things, it drills things. Oh, but this is a drill for this specific scenario. This is a saw for this specific scenario. This is a sander for this specific scenario. It's like, well, yeah, but like I get in a lot of situations, so I want kind of a few tools that do a lot of different things. That's how I approach video as well, because I don't end up doing just the one thing. Like I'm not just a wedding videographer. I'm not just a music video person. I'm not just a documentarian. Documentaries, like you get in all sorts of crazy situations. So that alone, there's value in having a multi-tool. But yeah, the ability to do a lot with a little and have a tool in one package. That's why I picked the GH4 and the GH5 for that very reason, and the Ursa Mini, because like it just does so many of the things that you want it to do without kind of compromising in any one way. Yes, it's not the most resolution, or it's not the biggest sensor, but it's really well rounded, and I appreciate that. All right, just looking through the chat here real quick. Just did a test in the sun in Florida, and the S1H understandably crushed the competition. This is a guy named Dan Watson, I guess. There's a YouTube video, I assume. So Dan Watson did a test. The S1H crushed the competition. The poor guy is getting flamed for it from the fanboys. Oh, I mean, yeah, like people defend their cameras, and they love Canon, and they love Sony, and they love Lumix, and like they love these brands because it's their livelihood, and rightfully so. Like I get it. What's funny is though that like there are some hard metrics on paper that like, oh, this one overheats sooner than this one. Like that's a fact. So it's funny that people defend it and they say, oh yeah, but it does 8K. Yeah, for like 10, 20 minutes. And then what are you going to do? You're going to shoot the low resolution 4K or 1080. And then why'd you buy the camera? Well, because the times I want to shoot 10 minutes of 8K, it's at RAW. It's incredible. Yeah, but I want a camera that does what it says all the time. So maybe we should talk about the S1H, because I think I have some thoughts about the S1H. And where we can go from here. I personally have not shot with the Lumix S1H, but that's for kind of a reason, a good reason that's pretty relatable to most people, I think, and that's the fact that I didn't really need it, and it's kind of expensive, especially for a camera that I don't need right at this point in time. So right now, the S1H is $4,000, and I think it is time for a price drop on the S1H. This camera does a lot of what you would want, and we can take a look at it. The S1H is a beautiful, beautiful camera full of features that if you don't know about the S1H, well, like, take a look, because it's a fantastic camera. It does everything you would want pretty much, but it's $4,000 right now. And I think that's a little expensive compared to the competition that's come out from Canon and Sony right now. Now, these cameras, the Canon, the R5, and the Sony a7S III aren't actually out yet, but they've been announced, and so anytime there's an announcement, people are always looking forward. They're going to save money, getting ready to pre-order or buy it when it comes out. And these cameras are coming very soon. The S1H is out right now, and you can buy it right now. And I think Panasonic would be really smart to reduce the price on this, considering this is $4,000. The R5 is like $4,000 or a little bit lower. I think I've seen it listed at like $3,800. The a7S III is like $3,500. So right now the S1H is the most expensive. Rightfully so. It's a great camera that does a lot of cool stuff. So let's take a look at what you're going to do with the S1H. If you don't know, for the people that do, just embrace the recap of just how cool this camera is. The S1H has dual ISO, or dual ISO, however you like to say it, for better low light. Again, I really want to get my hands on this camera so I can actually test this out. But based on user reviews and people have talked about the camera, it works really well. Just cleaner signal. The S1H is full frame. Like, let's start there. It's full frame. You've got the option to go all the way up to 6K if you want. And this camera came out in 2019. So before Canon was doing 8K, before Sony was doing 4K 120, Panasonic was doing 6K on a full frame mirrorless camera, and 4K 60 for that fact as well. 422 10-bit internal recording. Beautiful. Like these are features that people have wanted for a long, long time, and there will always be the people who say, well, it's a photo camera, so you don't need it. But yet they keep adding all these awesome features that make the video people happy, and we're like, yes, I'll happily keep shooting with these cameras. Like, a hybrid should be the best of both worlds. 422 10-bit doesn't hurt anything on the photography side. It only helps on the video side. Proper vlog. So if you know the GH5, the GH4, Vlog L. Highly criticized Vlog L. S1H has Vlog, the regular, real deal 14 plus stops of dynamic range with real deal Vlog, which is fantastic. What else do we have on the S1H? Well, we've got video performance. And again, you can go look at this. This is just the Amazon page, but I think it's fun to kind of go through, just see all the cool features that they call out, because this is stuff that like is relatively unique still in the hybrid market, something that's so dedicated to video. Now, there is the S1 and the S1R that are more photography cameras. So I'm just talking about the S1H, which if you're going to do hybrid, full frame, mirrorless, like the S1H is the one you want to get. HDR video, anamorphic. Canon and Sony, like, they don't even talk about anamorphic, but it's really valuable for the people who want to shoot that way, because like it's a cool feature to have. Variable frame rates, obviously, high frame rate stuff. You can do time lapses right in the camera. That's becoming more and more common, but that was like one of the best things about the GH4 was just the ability to do a time lapse right in the camera. I didn't have to download an app. I didn't need an external intervalometer like I had to have with my previous like Canon and Nikon cameras back in the day, shooting like DSLR, time lapse stuff of the night sky. It was all right in the camera. I'm like, this is brilliant. Yes, keep it in there. You've got the flip screen, the beautiful flip screen that goes every direction you would want it to go. You can do selfie style. I know it's kind of silly to do selfies on a camera of this caliber, but still, you have the functionality to be able to do it. Sony finally fixed it. Thank goodness. You got LCD on top. You got a high resolution viewfinder. The body design, yes. We know you've done a great design on this. Dual record buttons. I probably would only ever use the one, but hey, you have them. And you have some, wireless Wi-Fi remote viewing type features. And durability and reliability. We can go through this. You got in-body image stabilization. I think people criticize it on the S1H that it could be better. but it's there. So like, doesn't that make you excited for like the S2 or the S2H? The fact that it's there, and then hey, if it sucks, you can always turn it off. It's built tough. Yes. It's got a fan. This thing's not going to overheat. I mean, you probably, if you're filming lava, it'll probably overheat. But they put a fan in there because they knew that these cameras, they're full frame, they're shooting high resolution, they're shooting high frame rate. They knew it was going to overheat, and they put a fan in it. Give them a round of applause. And shame on Canon and Sony for not putting fans in their camera. It's ridiculous that they have an 8K camera that you can only shoot 10 or 20 minutes. You get a tally lamp, beautiful video feature, and double SD card slot, of course. I actually sometimes I don't recommend you use both slots sometimes because it can be easy to like forget which card has the footage on it, and it's an easy mistake to make, especially if you're working with a crew. But still, nevertheless, you can have redundancy, you can have overflow for where once one card is full, you go to the next one. It's a good feature to have, 2 slots. And I like that they're the same. So that's also important. It's funny when you have cameras that, I think it was on this list, cameras that have an SD slot and then like some other slot. And it's like, well, I just want the one kind of cards in my case. I don't want to have like 2 different types of cards. What if you fill one set up, but then the other set isn't? I don't understand why cameras have they have 2 slots, but they're different formats. It bothers me. I don't know if it's just I like symmetry or something, but it is irritating when cameras have 2 different slots. And then photo performance. So finally at the bottom of the list, we get to photography features. I'm sorry, photo people, if you think these hybrid cameras are meant just for you. They're meant for photo and video. Embrace it. It's a good thing. There's a high resolution mode, of course. So using the image stabilizer, it's going to take a series of photos and kind of photo stack them. Of course, this is something you can do in Photoshop as well, but the fact that you can do it in the camera is really cool. You've got autofocus, super fast sensor lens communication, 480 frames per second. It's the depth from defocus. I always forget what the DFD stands for. It's depth from defocus. All right. Technology helped make high-speed, high-precision autofocus of approximately 0.08 seconds a reality. Now, is this actually going to work in practice when you're out in the field and you're shooting a variety of images, subjects, different environments? We know that autofocus doesn't always work. Even the best cameras, it still fails some portion of the time. Panasonic isn't known for the best autofocus. Again, I haven't tested this camera myself, so I would be curious to put it through its paces and see. But I have a suspicion that it's probably not the best, but it also probably does good too. It's not like people like to think of it as like, oh, it's the best ever, and if it's not that, it's the worst ever. It's like autofocus, and these things are constantly getting better and improving. I mean, not too long ago, there were only a few autofocus points on every premium camera, and now there's like a bajillion because everything's just electronic now, and this doesn't really matter. It's all in the sensor. So it's just funny, the perspective, how it changes over time of people being like, oh, well, it's not the best, so therefore it's awful. It's like, no, it's still good. It's just not as good. So if you really need good autofocus, you can go with a different camera, but like, I'm sure it's acceptable. Accurate autofocus in low light, great. Human body and animal recognition technology, great. Most cameras have this, but isn't it wonderful that it's there? You can take pictures of your cats and it knows it's a cat. HLG photo, it's basically HDR photography, a way to do it, which is, I mean, a cool feature to have in the camera, I suppose, but you can also do these things with Photoshop. And yeah, so let's talk about the S1H. Having all that in mind, the fact that it's 6K, the fact that it's full frame, the fact that it does all these awesome things, is it time for a price drop? Yes, absolutely. If you drop the price, Panasonic, if you drop the price on the S1H, I'll probably buy it. And I know there's a lot of other people out there who will probably buy it. There's people who have the S1H who will buy more of them because we're looking at the market and we're saying, Canon, the R5, I was excited. I was ready to give Canon my money. I was going to go to the dark side. And then they couldn't deliver. There's always that little Canon magic that's sprinkled on their cameras, and they say, not quite. It does 8K, but not quite. We all knew it was coming. It was inevitable, but the rumors sounded too good to be true, and they absolutely were. So you see the R5. I wanted to buy something like that, a full frame camera that can do high resolution, do all these cool features, high frame rate. Yes, Let's get that. Wait, not the R5. I'm not getting that. It overheats. Giant file sizes. No, thank you. Recording limits. Like, no, I don't want to deal with any of that stuff. Sony A7S Mark III. Oh, interesting, interesting. Oh, it's still 4K. Oh, it's still kind of primarily focused on photos, but it's still only 12 megapixels, so it's not really a photo camera, but it doesn't have all the video features I would want that I've just become really used to. And it also overheats. So, I guess I'm going to go back to the S1H. Oh, but that's like the older one. And that's the mentality that happens. Like, oh, the S1H, well, I'll just wait for the S2 or the S2H, if that's what it's inevitably called, or maybe it'll be, I don't know. I don't know what they'll call it, but the sequel, right? The follow-up to the S1H. Maybe I'll just wait for that. Maybe I'll wait a year. Maybe I'll wait 2 years. Maybe I'll wait 3 years. Time goes by, and then other cameras come out, and people move. Now is the perfect time. Drop the price on the S1H. It's been out since September of 2019. Drop the price. You will sell a lot more. Now, what should that price point be? I don't know. If I was really being selfish, I'd want it to be like $3,000. Take $1,000 off the S1H. It's $4,000 now. Drop it down to $3,000. Is that realistic? Probably not. It'll probably come down to $3,500. In which case, it's like a little bit more of like sitting on the fence still. Like, ooh, I don't know. Do I really need this? I want it, but do I need it? If you bring it down to $3,000, I think you're going to get a lot of people who buy the S1H because people are hungry for cameras that do these types of things. Like right now, the market is primed. People are pre-ordering the R5. They're pre-ordering the A7S III. All of a sudden, Panasonic comes along and says, hey, remember that S1H we came out with that was too expensive when we came out with it and you didn't really know that you wanted it because like we don't have a lot of lenses for it just yet? Yeah, those lenses are coming. And guess what? That camera's now $3,000. Undercuts the Sony, undercuts the Canon with features that I think far exceed what Canon and Sony are offering. And this is a camera that came out almost a year ago, so I'm looking forward to the future. But by all means, use what's already out there. It's an easy thing. Just like send out the memo. Hey, take $1,000 off that camera, and see them fly off the shelves. Compared to all the stuff from Canon and Sony that people are excited for, and they have their Canon lenses and they have their Sony lenses, so they're not going to switch. But you have people like me. I'm like a huge GH5 fan, and I didn't get the S1H because I was like, I don't really need it. A little too much. I want it, and it'd be great. It would be fantastic to drop the price right now because then I get in the L mount system. I get used to full frame. I'm talking about me personally now. Get used to all these things, and then you've got me. I'm buying the L mount lenses. You come out with the S2, and I go, oh, I have to have this one and 2, and it's new, and it's the latest and greatest. Get people buying the S1H. I don't think a lot have sold. It doesn't seem, from my perspective, a very popular camera. I don't know anyone that owns one. I don't know anyone that shoots with one. Of course, there's people online who talk about them, but not nearly to the same level that you see with the Sony and the Canon cams, just because it's the L mount and it's like a new system. It's just starting out. But man, the S1H, I mean, these specs are incredible for the size of the camera and like it being so focused on video. Drop the price. It's a no-brainer. Popping back over into the chat. How's everybody doing? Just seeing what's going on over here. All other mounts are pushing the limits. Only Micro Four Third will make them possible of use in compact bodies with no fuss. S1H has HDMI output. Yeah, ProRes RAW now over from the S1H. You can do ProRes RAW to an external recorder. Now, do you have to buy the external recorder? Is that another inconvenience? Yes. Would it be great to have ProRes right in the camera? Yes, absolutely. GH6 should have ProRes in the camera. The S1H, the S2, like the Canon R5, the A7S III. Blackmagic knows what's up. The Ursa Mini, Pocket Cinema camera, both these cameras, they shoot ProRes. Why do they shoot ProRes? Because there's a great codec to edit. Give me Proxy, give me Light, give me HQ, give me 444, give me all the flavors of ProRes. Give me RAW, all in the camera. Pay the licensing fee to Apple. Just do it. I'm talking to the camera manufacturers, not individual shooters. You don't have to pay a licensing fee to shoot ProRes. But when they make cameras, they do. But it's worth it. It's way better than H.264, H.265. Like, no, ProRes. As a photo camera, you would want to keep the weather sealing versus adding a fan for video. Issues with the Swiss Army knife hybrid camera idea. Sure, I mean, that's fair, right? That's like, there are different people who need different things. If you need weather sealing and you need your camera to be as waterproof as and resistant to the elements as possible, yes, by all means. But you look at like the Ursa Mini Pro, there's vents all over that thing. There's fans all over that thing. Like, it makes sense. You can't say that like, oh, it doesn't make sense. Like, for video features, it does, especially if you're putting those video features at the forefront, which is why I think Panasonic was smart in the S1H to say, hey, this is a video hybrid. Like, this is our video-centric hybrid, the S1H. I actually don't know what the H stands for. I'd be curious to find out why it's H. It's probably something silly, but why the H means video. But anyway, having that and then saying, okay, you want something that's like, you know, weather sealed. They have this other SKU. I get that. I understand the reasoning behind it. Me personally, I don't find it as, I would rather have the video features, especially if they're advertising them. That's what's most frustrating. The fact that you're going to put it on the marquee. In fact, let's go pop over to Amazon here and go look at the R5, Canon R5. Oh, is it not on Amazon yet? Oh, we got to go to B&H. All right, go to B&H. Oh, is that not their website? I don't actually know the URL for B&H Photo Video. BH Photo Video? That's what it is. Not bhphoto.com. They should buy that. I don't know why they haven't. Canon R5. Oh my goodness. Canon R5. Oh. This is, oh, here we go. All right, R5. Let's take a look. Hey, key features, 45 megapixel full frame sensor, okay. 8K 30 RAW and 4K 120 10-bit internal video. Hey, look at that. They're advertising, and one of the key features is a video feature. I wonder if people expect this thing to shoot video. No, it's a photography camera. We can talk about that it has 8K. We can talk about it that it shoots 4K 120 and that it does 10-bit internal video. We'll say that to get your attention. But then when you criticize us for overheating, we take it away and we say, oh, well, it's a photo camera. It's not meant for video. It's not for real video. Then why are you advertising that it does 8K or 4K 120 or 10-bit video? Don't put that as a key feature on the marquee. In fact, isn't there there's another spot on B&H where they built like a custom landing page for the R5? I wonder if I can find it, because I think this is gonna prove my point. Let's see. Is this going to take me to the same place or someplace different? Hey, it took me where I wanted. The custom landing page that they built for the R5 and the R6. Top features, 8K. They made a little 8K bug right here for it. 8K video, in-body image stabilization, dual pixel, fast shooting, 4 or 5. Okay, great. Let's see what happens when we come down here. Designed for professionals. Superior quality, okay, but autofocus, in-body stabilization, okay, great. We're gonna compare them. And right, again, top of the spec sheet, video resolution. It's the third thing. They say resolution first and foremost of the sensor. They have sensitivity, and then they have video resolution. They put it there prominent for you to see, for you to say, hey, I want that. I want 8K RAW. That sounds cool. I want 4K 120. That sounds cool. And then they take it away from you and they say, actually, it overheats. And they admit to it, right? They say, oh yeah, it overheats. We know it. I think that is the most weaselly thing to defend Canon and say, oh, it's okay. It's a photo camera. If you want video features, buy a proper video camera. Then don't advertise it as a video camera. I'm not criticizing point and shoot cameras that only take photos and saying, why doesn't it do video, right? I'm not saying, hey, this camera should do all these things that I want it to do. Why doesn't it? I'm criticizing it for what they say that it does, and it doesn't actually do it. Well, it does, but for like 10 minutes or 20 minutes, however you want to factor it, depending on your conditions. I'm sure here in Phoenix, it's going to overheat in like 5 minutes, probably. But again, I'm not paid by Canon to give like amazing reviews, right? Hey, review our camera. We're going to send it to you for free, and we're going to give you it early access, and we're going to just say nice things about it. Say how great, how much you love the 8K, even though it, you know, it overheats. Oh, well, like I can work around it. Like they're not paying me to say nice things about their camera so I can be honest. I can say what I actually think. And I'm just one person. I don't expect everybody's going to agree with me. I understand that there's people out there that want to shoot 8K RAW for 10 minutes, and that's good enough for them, and they love it. That's fine. But I want to be able to say that, like, hey, this is hype. They're kind of misleading you. They're claiming a feature that they don't actually have. It's like, it's a lie. I mean, no, it's not technically a lie, but it's like very misleading to say it's an 8K camera or that it can shoot 4K 120, and it actually can't because it overheats. Oh, but then just switch it to the 4K regular mode or the 1080 regular mode. And it's like, that's not why you bought the camera that shoots 8K, so to not shoot 8K. So that's why I criticize Canon so much, because I criticize and then people don't understand why it's being criticized, and they say it's a photo camera. It's a photo camera. No, it's not. They're saying it's a video camera. So that's why I find it kind of silly. Looking over here at the chat. In-body image stabilization on the GH5. Yes, that's great. A7S overheated before the R5 II. Yeah, so I've heard the A7S III overheats as well. Like, these cameras, if they're offering these features, they need to put fans in them so they can actually record for the amount of time they can record. Now, is Canon going to come out with an R5S or an R5X or an R5V or whatever, or an R5F because it has a fan in it? Maybe. Maybe that's what they do at R5F because of the fan. That would be perfect, and maybe it's not weather sealed. Fine, but then it can at least do what you say it does. Like Panasonic, if the S1H, you know, 6K, but it overheats, and oh, it's got all this stuff, but it overheats, people would rip it to shreds, you know, because they don't have that loyalty. They don't have that fan base of people just defending the camera. And it's like, and that's why the GH5 even stands a chance. Why would people shoot with the GH5 if it was garbage? You know, because like, if the features didn't work, if it's like, oh, it's 4K 60, but it overheats, or hey, the GH4, yeah, it's 4K, but it overheats. Like, they're up against the battle of like being a smaller sensor compared to Sony. And that's what's funny, is that people still pick the GH5 over the full frame version, you know, equivalent to, you know, A7S II at the time, when that was kind of the battle. People still pick the GH5 with a smaller sensor because it was like more video features. Like, that's why I picked it. That's why a lot of people pick it. And it's like, it's an uphill battle where they're like constantly defending these cameras. Like, well, it's just smaller sensor, but like it does everything you want. It's like, yeah, thank you. I'm glad. Once you go Vlog, I'm back in the chat. Once you go Vlog in 10-bit, oh boy. Yes, yes. And true Vlog. I want real Vlog, not Vlog L. Past that at this point. Here in Europe, some companies have a deal on the S1H where they throw in a Ninja 5. Ooh, that's good to know. I wonder if you can get the similar deal on eBay or elsewhere online. I bet the GH5, is it 5? Well, that's confusing. See, this is why the letter add-ons are confusing. This person says, I bet the GH5's IBIS is better than the R5's or the A7 III's. Sure, it could be, but when you make it possessive and you say the GH5's with an apostrophe, could easily be confused for the GH5S, which is also out there. The H probably stands for hybrid. Could be, right? And then the S1R, I assume, stands for resolution. I assume, but I don't know that either. So I'd be curious to know. And the IBIS in the GH5 is the benchmark. Everyone acknowledges that. Yeah, I love using the GH5 with the in-body image stabilization. It works great. Sometimes you can get some like warping, you know, if you're doing, there's like different modes you can put it into, but like you can get some of that like warp stabilizer-y looking kind of stuff. But paired with a stabilized lens and stabilizing the camera, and if you're not doing anything crazy and nothing wild is happening, it works wonderfully. And then you shoot 60 frames a second, or you shoot 120 and 1080. I know it's feeling kind of dated. How antiquated the GH5 has become in just a short period of time. Only shooting 1080 120. It actually shoots 1080 180, but slightly reduced resolution. But if you need the frame rate, it's there. Not as good a quality. But But in any case, you do slow-mo with in-body image stabilization, with stabilization on the lens, and you'll get, like, you don't need a gimbal at that point for a lot of stuff, just because it works so well. The H stands for doesn't overheat. That's a fair point. It does not overheat because they put fans in it. Back in the chat, Canon said it had 8 stops of IBIS stabilization. WTF, perhaps they mean in photo mode. And then for video, Canon isn't close to the GH5. And that's really what it is. You know, I'm coming from Ursa Mini Pro, GH5. When the R5 was rumored as an 8K camera that also did 4K 120, it was going to do RAW, it was going to do 10-bit, it was going to do all this awesome stuff. I'm sitting there thinking, wow, I can't wait. Plus good autofocus, plus good stabilization, hopefully, plus, like all this stuff is going to be great. And then it overheats, and I go, oh, so I can't actually get all the features I want, the reasons I would want to upgrade. I could get the R6, but the R6 does exactly what I have currently. Granted, it is a bigger sensor, but if I'm going to get an R6, that's where it's like, the R6 is $2,500, so that's why if the S1H comes down to $3,000, like that's where it's at. And Panasonic would be very smart to lower the price significantly. I'm not talking about like $100 off or like a coupon or a rebate. No, I'm saying a substantial price cut to the S1H because you want market share. You want to, and granted, again, we're in a time where like people aren't looking to necessarily spend money. You know, people are looking to save their resources. Lower the price of the S1H, you'll sell more. I guarantee it. Let's talk finally about the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema camera follow-up, because I think that's valuable. I think that's interesting to talk about Blackmagic. I'd be curious how many people out there are shooting Blackmagic, whether it's the Ursa Mini, Ursa Mini Pro, Pocket Cinema camera, Pocket Cinema camera 4K, Pocket Cinema camera 6K. The amount of just letters and numbers that you have to store. Like I'm terrible at it too. Like I don't know any of like the Fuji SKUs really. I know there's like the GFX 100 is the medium format Fuji that'll shoot video, pretty good video. And what else? That's about it. That's about it I know from Fuji. Lumix, I don't know. There's so many Lumix up and down SKUs. Canon, they have the M. Are they still making M cameras for Canon? They're mirrorless. That's like not full frame and not APS-C. I don't even know what sensor size the M cameras are. There's just too much stuff out there, and I guess there's a lot of customers. I guess there's a lot of people buying this stuff. But then again, I know Olympus has been struggling or is maybe out of the camera business. I don't know. Who knows what's happening there? So it's like clearly there's like not enough customers. So I always wonder how many units they sell of some of these things that aren't the kind of like flagship ones that get the most hype online, because obviously people love talking about the GH5, the A7S, now the Canon R5, the 5D Mark IV, and you know any of the 5Ds. But it's like, and then what happened to like the 7D? Did that become the 6D? I guess. And there's the 6D Mark II, and that kind of just went away. And now there's the R5 and the R6 and the R and the RP. Is there going to be like an RP2, an RPS? I don't know. It's too much to keep track of sometimes. Blackmagic Design is one of my favorite companies. They make some of the coolest products, and not because I have some weird allegiance or they pay me as sponsored content. It's just because I genuinely like their products. I think they're really innovative. I think they offer a lot of cool things and with really cool features, and that's why I want to talk about them. Specifically, the Pocket Cinema camera and what it is currently, and then what I think it should become now that the Ursa Mini Pro 12K has been announced, and the Ursa Mini Pro is taking off in that direction of just crazy resolution and high frame rates and all the awesome stuff that comes with the Ursa Mini Pro. So I've shot with the Ursa Mini, original Ursa Mini 4.6K, the Ursa Mini Pro, which came after that had the built-in NDs and a few other additional features, and then the Ursa Mini Pro Gen 2, G2, that shoots 4K 120, and which all of these cameras are fantastic and great to use. I've also shot with the Pocket Cinema camera 4K. I haven't shot with the Pocket Cinema camera 6K, but they're very, very, very similar. The Pocket Cinema Camera 4K is a micro Four Thirds mount, so micro Four Thirds sensor, which you use micro Four Thirds lenses for, and you can still use a speed booster on it if you want. So think of a Pocket Cinema Camera 4K like a GH5. A Pocket Cinema Camera 6K has an EF mount, so it's got more resolution doing 6K, but it's got the EF mount. So the deeper mount, flange distance of traditional mirror box style DSLR cameras, which is not as flexible, which is why I probably, even though it's a bigger sensor and you get more resolution, I probably would stay away from the Pocket Cinema Camera 6K in today's day and age, just because the EF mount is kind of slowly going away as things go mirrorless. I think that's one of the downsides to Blackmagic when they create products. I think they look at them. I'm just reading into what I perceive. I don't actually know this for a fact, but I think they look at it and they go, what do people have a lot of? Oh, people have a lot of Canon EF lenses. Let's make a camera with an EF mount. Oh, people have a lot of LP E6 batteries. Let's make a video assist recorder that takes LP E6 batteries. And what ends up happening is both of these scenarios that I just described end up being less functional, even though they're very, very common. So the EF mount takes EF lenses, great, but it's not a mirrorless mount, so you can't adapt to it as much as you can with like micro Four Thirds. Micro Four Thirds, you can do speed boosters, you can adapt from Nikon or Canon or even like old vintage lenses. You can take like basically any lens that has ever existed and put on micro Four Thirds, and it'll work usually pretty fine. EF, because it's a deeper mount meant for a mirror box to be in the camera, even though there's not one in there, like there isn't a mirror in the Ursa Mini Pro or in the Pocket Cinema Camera 6K, like there's no mirror in there, but it's still the mount that's meant to have a mirror in there. It just makes it less functional, less adaptable. Same thing with the Video Assist. When I used to use those before the Atomos, the Video Assist, which I can pull up here on the Blackmagic site, so if you don't know what I'm talking about, you can take a look. The Video Assist is like an external screen recorder setup, which, where is it on here? Video and audio monitoring. So there's a Smart View 4K, Video Assist, here we go. The Video Assist, so this external monitor display that also records, I don't know if it still takes LPE6 batteries. It looks like it maybe does. Maybe there's a version that takes the Sony batteries. But in any case, the point is the LPE6 batteries are meant for DSLR cameras. So they're like one size. There aren't bigger and smaller ones like there are for some of the Sony batteries that are meant for camcorders. So if you can imagine what I'm talking about, there's some batteries that are deeper and they give you bigger battery life, and other ones that are smaller that are cheaper but then shorter battery life. The LPE6 is like one size. There isn't like deeper LPE6s. So what ends up happening is that the Video Assist just like chews through these batteries like really, really fast. So again, like I think Blackmagic is taking that approach of like, well, people have a lot of these batteries, so let's make a recorder that takes them. And it's like, yeah, but those batteries don't actually last that long, and they're not as adaptable as something else like the Sony batteries that are for like the Sony camcorders and such, that you can get these big, deep batteries, or V-mount batteries or gold mount from Anton Bauer. So that's kind of the problem I see with Blackmagic. I think they look at the market as it currently exists, and they're doing less of like projecting forward of like what is the most useful mount, what is the most useful battery, what is the most useful. They're kind of looking at like, well, what do people have? And I see that a lot too with the Pocket Cinema camera, because again, that takes the Canon LPE6 batteries, but it eats through them really, really fast. And you can get an external power adapter for the Pocket Cinema camera. But like, do you want to have external things? No, you want to be able to do everything right in the camera, bare minimum, and then add things to like really extend the battery life when you need something crazy like 8 hours or something like that in the field. So let's take a look. The Ursa Mini Pro, great camera. Now they have the 12K announced for $10,000. The G2 still listed at $6,000. We're going to come down though. The micro cinema camera is interesting and kind of quirky and kind of cool, but we're going to talk about the Pocket Cinema camera and where this should go next, because it's due for an update eventually, sooner rather than later, I would say. This is a really cool camera that is basically like a smaller, tinier version of an Ursa Mini with a few quirks The first and foremost being is that like this is kind of built like a DSLR or hybrid mirrorless camera meant to do photo and video, but this camera doesn't really do photo all that well. I would definitely not recommend it. It technically can take pictures. You can shoot that way with it, but it's really weird and awkward to do it. It's primarily a video camera. So why they went with the form factor, I don't mind it. I don't mind that it can be held that way. But if they're going to keep that kind of hybrid mentality, they really have to upgrade some of like the photo capabilities, or at least make it feel more like a proper photo camera and not so much like a video camera, because it definitely leans that direction. The first thing I would do when you refresh this thing, change the design a little bit, enough so that it's new, but change the name. The Pocket Cinema camera is one of the worst names. I absolutely despise it. And the fact that now it's the Pocket Cinema camera 4K and 6K and they have the different SKUs. What about this is pocketable? You can't fit that in your pocket. I don't know anyone's pockets that are big enough to fit a Pocket Cinema camera. So don't call it the Pocket Cinema camera. Call it like the hip cinema camera, because you can put it on your hip or you can wear it on your neck if you're like got a lanyard type thing. No, change the name entirely. The Ursa and the Ursa Mini makes sense because there's the Ursa and then the smaller one, the Mini. Ursa is a cool name. It sounds like something. It sounds like, it's a bad example, but like a Ford Taurus or like a Chevy Camaro. It's a Camaro. It's a Corvette. It's a Mustang. Like, it has a name, an identity. That's one thing I love about Red and their cameras. It does get really confusing whether it's the Raven or the Weapon or the Gemini or Hydrogen or Komodo or like Epic and Monstro. Like, Red has gone a little bit overboard over the years with being really, really confusing. Blackmagic's at a great spot. They don't have that many cameras. They don't have that many SKUs. Make a cool name. Call it something interesting. Pocket Cinema camera is descriptive, but it's not accurate because you can't fit it in your pocket. And cinema camera. Most cameras are cinema cameras now. Like, that's not unique or interesting in any way. If I say Ursa, it might not be as popular as some of the Red cameras, but you know what that is. It has staying power. And that's what I would recommend first and foremost. Change the design, give it a cool, much better name, and take it from there. Okay? Let's give this, if we look at the Ursa Mini Pro and they're taking that to become a 12K camera, I don't think the successor to the Pocket Cinema camera needs to go to 12K, maybe 8K, but like 6K, around that range I think is good. Improve the frame rates, but think about the mount. Or should they go RF? Should they go Sony E mount? I don't actually know what would be the best choice. Maybe L mount is new with like Sigma and Panasonic and Leica working with the L mount. But something that's mirrorless, and I think if the Pocket Cinema camera, the next one, is going to be that true hybrid from Blackmagic, it should have a full frame sensor. Right now, they have a Super 35 sensor with the 6K version. If they made a version that has a full frame sensor and kind of distinguish a little bit between the Ursa Mini Pro 12K being a film, broadcast, video, like you look at this thing, this is going to shoot video. It's going to make beautiful film. It's a true cinema camera. Have the Pocket Cinema camera, that line, whatever that becomes, be more of your photography line, hybrid, video, all in one, small form factor, and figure out a way to put NDs in there and change the mount, I think, and change the battery too, because that's like, fix all the shortcomings on the Pocket Cinema camera. If you've shot with them, you know what they are. And at this point, it's kind of, I think Blackmagic could find a really strong spot in the market with like that hybrid, like making parity with like equal with Canon, Sony, Panasonic, and Blackmagic can be right there. A true photography camera that does all the video features that already, like Blackmagic is known. Like, if you haven't shot with these cameras, I actually really, really like how they look, just like the log profile. They call it film, but it's kind of their log look out of the camera. Incredible dynamic range. I really like the color. I think it's easy to grade. These things shoot ProRes in body, which is an incredible advantage, especially when you're used to, if you come from like MP4s and H.264 and H.265, and if you're editing in Premiere and it's chugging and it's slow and you're going to make proxies and you're going to do all this stuff, the moment you just shoot and edit ProRes, it's life-changing when it comes to workflow. It's fantastic. And keeping that in a camera and then adding some of the photo features and making the sensor size a little bit bigger, having in-body image stabilization, and doing some of that stuff that has become kind of standard in the market, but having something from Blackmagic that they're known for that cinema style and aesthetic. Because a lot of times people can't tell. They look at it and they go, oh, is that if they're looking at the footage, if they look at the camera, they obviously know it's not a red. But if they're looking at the footage, they go, oh, that's beautiful. Is that like a red? Is that an Alexa? Like what shot that? And you're like, oh, it's the Ursa Mini Pro. And they're like, what is that? It's like, yes, keep pushing. And then the other thing I have to just give Blackmagic, just applaud them for, is the other camera products they have. So like cameras are like a newer addition to Blackmagic. Blackmagic is much more of like an AV style company with a lot of switchboards and that kind of stuff. But if you don't know the full catalog from Blackmagic, it's actually really cool. They have some really neat stuff. They're actual live switchers. So they have these mini like switchers that are really cheap, really affordable, and you can do live switching right to your computer. I'm not doing that right now. I don't actually have one of these, but they look really cool. And it's something that like I would love to have just for that flexibility now that a lot of jobs are turning into live video jobs. Being able to do a live switch to YouTube, to Facebook with multiple cameras with like quality inputs, right? Like these are HDMI, can take multiple cameras, send it out there. Like it's really cool. They've also got the external recorders, like the video assists. And I think those have been updated since I had one. But I've gone to like Atomos, and like I actually don't end up using external recorders and monitors all that often, but it's nice if you need them and that's part of your rig. But they used to have, and maybe they still do, it was like a rudimentary switchboard, but it like also turned the cameras like into like a webcam for your laptop, and that's how that switchboard works. They've kind of updated that. I think it's under streaming and encoding. The web presenter. This is it. So this is a little bit older, probably outdated now by the switcher, but Blackmagic makes really cool stuff, and it's the stuff that's like maybe not immediately like, oh, like I want that, but you're like, oh, I could actually use something like that. That would be really, really helpful for this project I have coming up. So anytime you're given a job or a task that's kind of in like the AV world where it's like switching or live production or anything like that, check out the Blackmagic stuff, because they end up having really good products that are really affordable that are actually kind of like hard to find or not a lot of people are making. So really interesting, really kind of innovative stuff. And I'm really excited for whatever the Pocket Cinema camera is, like the next one. I think what they have currently is cool and is good. I mean, even it wasn't the Pocket Cinema camera, it was just the Cinema camera. I think it was their first one, right? And it's like they've gotten better and better and better at making cameras. And if the Ursa Mini Pro 12K is any indication of where they're heading, I'm really excited of where the Pocket Cinema camera is going to go. I'm going to pop back over here into the chat and just see what's going on. The R6 also has a 30-minute time limit. See, and that's the thing. I'm done with time limits. I'm done with overheating. This is like DSLR video stuff from like 10 years ago where we all worked around because the only other option was like buying a camcorder with a fixed lens. And it was like, oh no, I'm not doing that. I'll make do with the recording limits of the DSLR. I don't want to go back to that in 2020. I own and shoot the Pocket 4K. It's outstanding. Also have the S1H. Yeah, Pocket Cinema 4K. Beautiful, beautiful footage from that. I will say using the LPE6 batteries is a challenge because it just eats through them so quickly. You can get external power supplies, but it's just more stuff hanging off your camera, and a lot of times you don't want to do that. And you don't want to be switching batteries every, like, I think it's like 30 to 40 minutes. You need to swap those Canon batteries if they're like new good ones. So that's one of the minor irritations of that camera, or major irritations depending on how you look at it. Would you be into an A7S III but APS-C? I prefer full frame. Like I would love, that's why I want the S1H. I want a full frame camera, but it's also not, it's more expensive than what it's worth for what it offers me compared to the GH5 and compared to the Ursa Mini Pro. The S1H is those things like it'd be nice to have, but for $4,000, it's a little steep. That's why I say if they bring that price down, that I think is the place to be. And I'm gonna pop back over here. What should we pull up? Let's pull up the S1H because I just think it's such a beautiful camera. Really, really want them to lower that price because then I'll buy one. Selfishly. You'll see that on Amazon, it's got like 12 reviews. I mean, Amazon's kind of goofy because they have different SKUs, but there's only 12 reviews. And it's got 4 stars. And I'll pull this up here. Yeah, it's got 12 ratings and 4 stars. And if you look, most of the complaints are that the autofocus isn't like good enough, which is like, I guess one of the. I mean, you want autofocus to be good, I suppose, but like it's not necessarily. I don't expect it to be. Considering everything else this camera has, like if the autofocus is good, like that's good enough. And if it's absolute trash and it's terrible, which I don't think, because like there's plenty of people who have the S1H and they love it. It's just funny the way people criticize things. Like 1 star, autofocus wasn't good enough, and it's like, what? You didn't care about all the other features? Sorry, off on a tangent. Back to the chat. But no, I would not be into an A7S III APS-C. In fact, if an A7S III, it's weird. It would be weird to use a crop lens on there because it's a 12 megapixel sensor. So what does that bring you down to? Like 8 megapixel photos if it was APS-C. So yeah, no, I like full frame cameras. I like the full frame look. Shoot, medium format. Like bring it on. Like the bigger the sensor, the better. Let's do it. It's the fact that the features they add to that Canon and Sony are adding are melting their cameras. You know, I didn't realize all these camera companies wanted to start making toasters. It's kind of a little silly that you say it does 8K, you say it does 4K 60 or 4K 120 or does RAW, but then it doesn't because it overheats. Ursa means bear. Yeah, so Ursa, it's like the constellations, right? Which is funny. It's a missed opportunity. There's Ursa Major and Ursa Minor. I believe that's the Big Dipper and the Little Dipper, if I'm getting my astronomy correct. Ursa Major and Ursa Minor. So that's why like Blackmagic should have done that with those cameras. There should have been the Ursa Major and the Ursa Minor, but instead they went with the Ursa and the Ursa Mini. Missed opportunity there. I think, me personally, I think they should stick with the constellation things. The constellations, right? Go for like the pocket cinema camera. Call the next one like Orion or Taurus or Sagittarius. I don't know. Whatever. Pleiades. I don't know all the constellations, but tap into that. I think there's something there that's relatively like the Zodiac. They're relatively kind of not a lot of stuff, like there's not cars with those names, there's not computers with those names, like cameras, it's wide open, and you already got the Ursa, stick to it. I think my vote would be for the Blackmagic Orion. I think that would be I just love that name. I think it's really cool. That's what I'd stick with. But anyway, back to the chat. I just bought an A10 Mini, not the Pro. Excellent. I would love to know how it works out for you, if there's any quirks to be aware of. But yeah, I've been looking for like live switching projects. They're so cheap, relatively speaking, you know, to be able to do live switching on the fly with like a nice, you hook a monitor up to it and you can get your multicam view. I believe that might not be on the regular one. Maybe you need the Pro for that, but I think the Pro is only like $500, which may be expensive depending on what your budget is, but historically, considering switchers and switchboards of the past for doing live video, like feeding into a computer, it's very, very reasonable. What camera are you using for this live stream? Funny enough, this is an Ursa Mini. This camera is an Ursa Mini Pro. The tax credit is over. There is no need to include a time limit now unless your camera overheats. Yeah, so for the longest time, there was like a tax thing where like certain cameras that recorded continuously got taxed as video cameras, but it was different for photography cameras. In any case, it's just a silly reason to implement a limitation on a camera, especially if it's only a thing in Europe. Like, I guess if you have to do it in Europe, then do it on the European firmware, but like don't restrict everybody else for something that doesn't, I mean, it shouldn't matter. If you can record continuous, which the GH cameras have been able to do for a long time, like I've been shooting continuous, I don't even know, almost 6-7 years on like mirrorless hybrid cameras. I don't know, I'd actually have to like map it out. But yeah, like the GH4, no, it would just record, no problem, right? Now granted, the GH4 would split the clips because it still did the stupid FAT32 like 4 GB clips. So you would record continuous and it would be fine, but you'd pull it into editing and you'd have a bunch of 4-minute clips, or roughly 4-minute clips. They were each about 4 gigs. And then you'd have to like stitch them all together in Premiere. What we ended up doing at the time was laying them all into a sequence and then nesting all of that to kind of make a fake kind of like master camera take, rather than having like some kind of, you know, encoding to compile them to make more files. Like when I'm editing in workflow, I really hate making extra files for the sake of like efficiency and like workflow, because it ends up decreasing that your extra time encoding and transcoding. You've got extra storage space eaten up on your hard drive from these extra files. So like that's why I love the Ursa Mini Pro, is because like it shoots ProRes and like the file is the file that I edit start to finish, and like I don't have to convert it at any point in time. I don't have to stitch clips together, like it records continuous. And thankfully with the GH5, they moved the, I believe it's the system architecture to where like the way they're storing files is like it's one file. So on a GH5, you record 1 hour-long take and you get 1 hour-long clip. It's not a bunch of 4-minute segments. So that was the minor irritation on the GH4, but at the time it was the only camera of that caliber, of that price point, that did 4K. So it's like the trade-off, right? You're constantly making these trade-offs as technology is improving, and then that's what's so irritating or just tragic about the Canon and the Sony. These new cameras that are coming, it's like we're taking steps backward. We're adding more features, but we're not actually getting them because we're overheating. And like you should be able to address that because the S1H does. And you know how they did it? They put a fan in it. I know that doesn't give you weather sealing, but like it gives you the ability to record without overheating, which is incredibly important if you're offering it up as a video camera. I had a GH4 for years and I never had a problem with the autofocus. Yeah, the autofocus thing is something people like to harp on. I think it's just that it's that difference of like there are other cameras that do it better, but by no means does the GH4 do it like poorly or the GH5 do it poorly. It's just not as good. So in comparison, it is lesser than, but it's not like it's awful and unusable. No, you can use it. Is it perfect? Is it as good as maybe what's on the Sony? No, but it's still usable. It's still good. So I think that's where like the conversation gets like hung up a little bit. It's not like you use autofocus on the GH5 and it overheats. In that case, I would ridicule it because it's worth ridicule at that point. The Blackmagic Big Dipper. That's right. Bring it on. I really think the Constellations, it's just a good through line. And get rid of the pocket cinema camera. Get rid of the micro cinema camera. These things are meaningless. It's like the Ford sports car. It means nothing. And then it's like the Ford sports car super or whatever. It's like, the Ford Mustang. Give it a name, give it an identity that people can go, yeah, I want that. Like the red Komodo. They're so smart that they do this because it resonates. The red Raven. Oh yeah, that sounds cool. I want that. The red Epic, the red Dragon. Like these things resonate with people in a way that like if you tell someone, oh, what camera is that? Oh, it's the GH6 or it's the GH5S or it's the A7S III. Like they're meant for catalogs, right? These are product numbers in catalogs, and it's not even, they're actually longer than that. What are they really? Because it's not just the S1H. Oh no, it is the S1H. What is the GH5? Isn't it like the D? Where's it at? Do they not list it on Amazon? No, yeah, the DC GH5. Yeah, and like the GH4 probably has it too. They have these just like arbitrary like pre-designators. That's what I was talking about with Canon and how they have, you know, EOS in front of all their cameras. And it's like, why? Why do you need to put EOS there? What good does it do in this day and age? Back to the chat. I'll wrap this up soon. I bought an A10 Mini as well. I just used it to film multicam for a drum video. Works pretty well for the price. Excellent, good to know. That's why I love the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema camera. 4K, one file, absolutely, and it's ProRes. Or you can shoot RAW if you prefer. The S1H is weather sealed. The vents are external to the cavity. So there you go. People complaining about weather sealing, there you go. It still is weather sealed, according to this person in the chat. I haven't personally shot with it, so I don't know. I don't know if you can shoot in the rain with it, or if you can shoot in your crazy conditions of sandstorms and whatnot. Most of the time when I'm shooting, I'm not putting stuff on or near the camera in any way that would affect it in that way. But I understand if you're shooting extreme, then like, yeah, it's important. But also, like, so is a fan, so the thing doesn't overheat. A10 Mini Pro is sold out worldwide, impossible to get right now. If you have a powerful computer, you can do similar with OBS or Ecamm Live. Pro is good if you want to go live without a computer. So yeah, right now I'm streaming with OBS, and OBS is awesome just because it's free and it does so much. And I mean, most people use OBS for streaming. But it is that thing of like, if you're running all your cameras to your computer to switch in OBS, well, now your computer has to be really, it takes the burden of all that work and all that processing, even if you're, you know, converting it. So I'm using a Cam Link right now to run HDMI into the computer. And if I had multiple cameras, I could switch in OBS, but then I have to be like in OBS land. I like the A10 Mini because it gives me that external control. It does all the, you know, encoding, transcoding, capture a video signal there, and then it pipes one video signal into the computer so that the computer can focus on what it's doing, which is the live stream, which is the internet connection. The last thing you want to do is bog down your machine with like 4 cameras, and then the laptop crashes in the middle of a stream, and then the whole thing is broken. I would rather have all that processing power take place outside of the computer so the computer can kind of run efficiently and not overheat and do all those things that are, you know, potentially going to happen. Yeah, don't melt your camera with overheating. Don't melt your computer. Don't overclock, you know, these things. Because it's cool to say that it can do 8K. It's cool to say that it can do 7 gigahertz processing, and then it melts through the metal into the floor and your house lights on fire. I would be curious if someone could actually, like, if you're able to, like, so they did Magic Lantern, you know, the hacks for the 5D and many others in the Canon DSLR lineup. So they hacked it Magic Lantern. I wonder if you hacked an R5 to not stop, like just let it overheat, like what happens? Does the sensor melt? Like what damage is done by just letting it overheat? I remember back in the day, the 5D Mark II and the 7D would overheat all the time, especially shooting in Phoenix. And it was irritating, but it was something we dealt with, I'm talking about 10 years ago now, because the benefits were so valuable at the time. You literally couldn't, you know, get that look kind of any other way at that time because it was like full frame video with the 5D. With 7D, it's APS-C. But they would overheat, right? You're outside, you're shooting in the sun, the camera gets hot, it gives you the warning, just like your phone does every once in a while too, right? But it's not fair to say that like, oh, this camera does all these cool features, but it overheats. It's like, then why don't you buy the one that doesn't overheat? Because those exist too. It's not like you're getting something super special and super magical that no one else is doing. It's like, oh no, you can get something very similar and very comparable that doesn't overheat because it was designed to not do that. They knew it was an issue. It's funny, like on the S1H page, they call out that it like doesn't overheat. Here, I'll show you. Where's that? Right here. It has a heat dispersing fan, non-stop recording without overheating. It's like they knew. It's like Panasonic knew that these things would overheat. So they put a fan in it. It's smart. Back to the chat. The S1H has a Sony Exmor sensor too. Yeah, so that's something with like the Lumix cameras. I believe most of them all use Sony sensors. I don't know if Canon makes their own sensors. I don't actually know the sensor game. Maybe it's something you could dive in, like who's making the sensors in all these cameras. But Sony makes quite a few of the sensors. And then I was told the S1H has extremely close relative sensor to the Sony FX9. Could be. I don't actually know. I think the way the sensor is handled, because a camera isn't just the sensor, right? It's the image processor. It's all the things. I mean, even using a camera, it's like the menus. I've talked about this before, but like the Ursa Mini Pro and the Pocket Cinema camera are great to use because the menu, just using the camera, is nice. It's about more than like just the sensor in the camera. It's the overall functionality of the camera, which is maybe why I go too hard on Canon, and I don't love Sony like some people do, just because it's full frame. It's like I like a camera that does what I want it to do all the time, and that's the GH5. That's the Ursa Mini Pro. I bought those cameras like for reasons, because they're intentionally good at what they do. I don't want to buy something that's like, it's good sometimes, but it doesn't actually do that all that often because it overheats, or it has a recording limit, or the battery life dies too quickly. Also, reason like didn't go with Pocket Cinema camera. It's just like you don't want restrictions. Like that's the last thing you want to be thinking about on a shoot. It's fun to talk about, on a stream or in videos, to talk about cameras and kind of geek out about the tech side of things. But like on a shoot, you don't want to be thinking about like who made the sensor in your camera and, oh, this shoot's going to go perfect because Sony made the sensor. Like that's not what you should be thinking about on a video shoot. You should be thinking about coaching the actors, or setting up the lights, or working through the challenges of the location. And that's why there's so many problems that often come up on location, on set, when you're doing projects, that like the technology that's in your backpack, it has to work. The worst thing is like going to fly a drone and it's like, oh, you need a firmware update. You can't take off. Oh, you can't do this. Oh, you can't do that. It's like, no, I rely on the tools to work all the time because I don't want to have to think about them. It's like, okay, I charged the batteries. I did that. I made sure stuff was clean and prepped, but like, I don't want to question if the camera is going to make it through the day. I don't want to question if my lights are going to randomly overheat. Like, could you imagine lights that's like, yeah, it's lights. It's a 300D Mark II, but you can only use it for 15 minutes because after that it overheats. No, I'm going to buy the light that just stays on all the time, even if it's less powerful, because chances are I don't need super output for 15 minutes. I need good, decent output all day long. And that's why it's confusing to me that people, well, it's not confusing. I get why people like what they like, but like, I wish more people treated it more like fairly, or what I think is more fairly. It's like, look at it realistically. How are you actually going to use this? Are you just geeking out and saying like, oh, it's so amazing it does 8K RAW? Or are you thinking about the actual implications of like, are you going to use that? Because if it overheats, like, I can't imagine that being practical for most jobs. Back to the chat. Buy lights instead. That being said, the new Sony looks pretty fantastic. Yeah, the A7S III looks great, but I hear that one overheats too. So I don't know. I haven't used these cameras because, again, they don't send them to me for free. I'm not paid to do these reviews. I can only speak honestly about what they put out. And they say it does 8K, but it also overheats. Or, hey, it does this awesome stuff, 4K 120. And then people are like, oh, but it overheats. Go figure. Back to the chat. My go-to has been the GH5 since the pre-order. Yep, GH5 equals IMX 272, GH5S equals IMX 299. Is that a like a catalog code? 15 minutes of light. I love that. Yeah, it's ridiculous to buy something based off of features that aren't consistent. I'm trying to think of any time, like you would never buy a blender that only blended for 10 seconds and then overheated. You wouldn't buy a car that could only drive 5 miles or 10 miles until you needed to fill it back up. It's just not practical. Like, oh, you can go really, really fast. So, the brand new Tesla that's coming out, it goes 300 miles an hour, and it flies, but you can only go, 50 feet. It's like, well, the fact that it does what you say it does isn't that impressive anymore, because it can only do it for such a short period of time that's not actually functional or practical. The same thing is why people, and this is, people complain constantly about battery life on smartphones, on cameras. They say, oh, better battery life, because everyone knows that the longer you can do something, use something for it at its optimal performance, the better the product is. The phone that can last 5 days without recharging is an obvious selling point, especially if you're a type of person who likes to go camp and hike in the wilderness, and just not having to worry about recharging your phone or your phone dying just because you're using it. I mean, how many people are on their smartphone and they're not even like halfway through the day and the battery life is drained out? It's annoying. It's annoying that you can't use the thing to the fullest and you have to plug it back in and charge it back up. Thankfully, with a phone, you can charge it while you're using it, but then you have a pack, like you're dangled with like a external battery brick thing. You've got to plug it into a wall. You're tethered now. Same thing with cameras. If the GH5 had a battery that only lasted, 20 minutes, it would be ridiculed, because it's ridiculous. The fact that you have to swap batteries every 20 minutes. Good luck shooting, 4K and have 4K 60, but it can only do it for 20 minutes because you have to switch batteries. It would be a joke because of how poorly it's implemented. It's like, put a bigger battery in it, and so for people to say, oh, it shoots 8K, and it's like, yeah, but it can only do it for a short period of time and then it overheats. And it's like, they could have put a fan in it. No, they couldn't do that. They had to do it the way they did it because, they know what they're doing. And it's like, yeah, I'm sure they do know what they're doing, and they're making it work, and they're fitting their budgets. They want to get the camera to a certain price point. But you have to admit that is a severe limitation. It's a cool thing that it can shoot 8K RAW or 4K 120 for brief periods of time. That's cool, but it's also a huge restriction. What was it? The FS700, the Sony FS700 would shoot, burst, like high frame rate type stuff in quick bursts, and you couldn't do it continuous. That is a restriction. That is a limitation. Now, is it usable in the scenarios where you're like, oh, I'm only filming the glass break, so I only need to record for like 10 seconds or whatever it was? It's like, okay, that's understandable, that like the actual practical use case, that makes sense, that it's kind of restricted and kind of limited. But the fact that you want to shoot 8K RAW, like what scenario do you only want to do that sometimes, but then the rest of the time you're going to shoot 4K or 1080? Like, I don't know what that situation is and why I would ever accept that, because it's immediately I'm going to have to justify it to every other person there and say, oh yeah, well, we can only shoot for 10, 20 minutes and then we got to wait again. No one wants to do that. No products are meant to work the way they work without these kind of pushing it to the limit, to the point of where it's overheating and then saying, oh, well, that's just the way it is. It's like, well, why is it the way it is? Back to the chat. With 8K, how long is too long for a cat video? Exactly. And that's the thing too. What are you shooting? Put your money and resources into lights, into actors, into sets, into hair and makeup, wardrobe, all that stuff. And then the sensor models are Sony. Yeah. Sony makes a lot of the sensors, so it makes sense. I'm going to wrap it up there. Appreciate everybody who's chat in the chat. Again, I don't say any of this to say that you're wrong or that I'm right. It's just my personal perspective of what I think, what I believe, how I approach video and filmmaking, right? I'm not a photographer first and foremost. I take photos. I do photography, but I'm much more interested in filmmaking, cinematography, video. And so that's why I'm biased. Of course I'm biased. We're all biased. We all have our opinions about these things. So just saying that hey, here's what I believe is not saying that well, you're wrong if you think different, but it is context for people who are determining well, what's the right camera for me? I don't know, which one should I buy? People always want to know. They always ask what's the best camera? And the answer is it depends. It depends on what you're trying to do with it. This is what I think the best cameras are. This is what I think about the way I work. But there's plenty of other people who think differently, and it's about weighing all those and evaluating, okay, what type of production style do I align with more? Does that make more sense? Would I go more this route? Should I get the A7S III? Should I get the R5? I really see a use case for 8K RAW. It would be valuable to me. Well, if that's the case, then go ahead and get the camera. Like, it's not like you're a bad person for buying a Canon R5. I just personally wouldn't buy it. I don't think it's worth the money for me because I wouldn't actually use it in the way that it would actually be executed. I would much rather get like an S1H or an Ursa Mini Pro or a GH6, you know, when that finally gets announced. Hopefully, fingers crossed, it's actually something cool and worthwhile. But yeah, all this stuff is just different tools for different types of people who are doing different types of projects. There's a lot of work out there, a lot of different styles of work, a lot of different ways to approach production. And there is no one size fits all of like, this is the best way. But hopefully you can at least value my opinions in that way, that they're my opinions and you don't necessarily have to accept them to be your opinions either. I think one thing came back in the chat, so I'll wrap it up here. Hit those likes, folks. I didn't say it. It's from the chat. Thank you, everybody, for coming in here, giving me something to talk about. It's fun. I enjoy it. I enjoy seeing the enthusiasm for cameras and technology and our passion for doing what we do. Because that's like the end of the day. Like, that's what is the coolest thing, that we all have this, like, we might disagree on what the best camera is or what the right lighting setup is or any of that stuff, but it's like we're all passionate about what we do, and that's what's cool, is that like we're going to take the time to have those conversations, to talk through it, to get in the weeds, to fight it out, so that we can all get a little bit better along the way at doing what it is that we love to do. At least that's how I look at it. I love video, I love creating content, and I just think it's a lot of fun, and I'm glad there's other people out there who like it too.